Last night in our Saturday service, I told about a bandit named Black Bart, and come to find out it's Terry Morris's best friend. I didn't tell Terry I was going to say it. But Terry's grandfather knew Black Bart. He actually existed in the late 1800s. So if you want to know about Black Bart, just ask Terry. But Black Bart was an Englishman. He was infamous because he was quite the robber of stagecoaches. But he was a gentleman bandit. And he would leave poems after he would rob people. Kind of interesting, huh? Give me your money and I'll give you a poem. I hadn't thought of that tack. Maybe I should try that. But Black Bart had a black beard. That's, I guess, where the black came from, but Terry and I haven't figured out yet where Bart came from because that wasn't his name. But the reason I tell the story was because there was a gentleman who I worked with when I was at Westinghouse. He was our supplier, and for some reason this gentleman did not seem to like me. And I couldn't figure it out because, I've never done anything to him that I knew of. And so weeks went by and our relationship just didn't seem to be very good. And it was important that we had a good relationship because he was one of our major suppliers and we really needed to work together, at least in the business sense. And then my boss, who lives several hundred miles away, flew into town and came to see me. And he said, and we talked about this situation, and he said, I found out why this gentleman does not like you. I said, really? He said, it's because you have a Bible on the back of your credenza. In the morning, when I first got to work, I would close the door of my office and I would do my Bible study, and then I would lay my Bible on the back behind my desk at the credenza, never even thinking about the fact that it was there. I didn't even think about people noticing it was there. So I took that Bible and I began to put it in my drawer, and our relationship improved. And I guess you could say that is a form of mild persecution. And Jesus says that those who are persecuted because of righteousness. You see, when you have that right relationship with Jesus Christ, and someone does not have that right relationship, that belief in Jesus Christ, then the Bible tells us you will be persecuted. Now in America, that persecution takes a very subtle form, but I think it is becoming more and more prevalent. One of the places, indeed, is we are persecuted in our work life. As we go back to Jesus' day, can you imagine a stonemason, for instance, someone who would work with stone and build these large temples, especially these cultic temples, these temples to Diana, for instance, where they would have these festivals, and really what they were basically orgies to this goddess of love, and they would sacrifice animals to this god, and they would have these parties. Now, if you're a Christian, someone, a stonemason who became a Christian in the time after Christ, and your boss came to you and said, I want you to work on the temple of Diana to help build that temple. And you think, I really don't approve of these cults. I don't really want to work on that temple. So you tell your boss that. And your boss says, well, then you're not going to be working for me. Or in today's world, we've heard a lot about the Catholic hospitals and institutions that are being forced to provide birth control, even abortive birth control, the so-called day-after pill, under the new health care plan. But what about the Lutheran hospitals who also may have those same beliefs being required by government to provide this? Or what about a Christian doctor or nurse who works in a hospital where abortions are given? Right now, most laws in most states protect them, and they aren't forced to participate in these abortions, but are we very far down the road from that actually happening? Or what about persecution in a social life? Now, during Jesus' days, as I said, they had feasts at these temples, and that was part of the social society. And so if you didn't participate in the feast, you weren't part of that social group. Or in today's world, as young people face alcohol, and drugs, and sex, and if they don't participate in that, are they ostracized in our world? Or what about persecution at home life? You see, in the time after Jesus, many were becoming Christians, especially in the Gentile nation. And maybe a husband would become a believer and the wife wouldn't, or vice versa, or a child would become a believer. What great persecution that may have caused in those families. During Jesus' days, strong believers maybe would have problems with the unbelieving spouse. And I've seen that in today's world. I've had many women in my office particularly who tell me the story about the fact that they are believers, and when they got married, they thought their husband would become a believer during their marriage. And now it's many years down the road, and that has not happened. Or maybe they weren't a Christian when they got married and they became a Christian, but their husband or their wife has not followed in that path. You see, Jesus didn't come to make our life easy. He came and said that we will be persecuted. And he even tells us why we will be persecuted. He talks about when people falsely say all kinds of evil against you. You see, our beliefs are different than society's beliefs. Now, I don't like to be political in my pastorate here, and I normally don't talk politically out of the pulpit. And I hope the story I tell you is not a political story, because I believe it could happen to a Republican or a Democrat, but the particular person I'm pointing out just happens to be a Republican. That was the person who ran for vice president in the last election, Sarah Palin. I guess I was kind of amazed as I watched her, political life unfold. From everything I read about her, she was a strong Christian, but the persecution seemed to continue to come. Now, part of that may be because of something she said or because of the way she acted, but I believe some of that was because of the fact that she was a Christian. And as she was persecuted, even to the point where her church in Alaska was burned down. It just was kind of an amazing thing to watch, and I'm sure a similar thing has happened to a Democratic candidate who is a strong Christian. Our beliefs are different than society. Our words are different than society. Jesus talks about when people insult you. I'll never forget, it must be 20 years ago now, I went to a high school graduation, and after the graduation was over, I was walking across the football field, and I heard what sounded like young ladies uttering these unbelievable cuss words that I said, wow, I don't think a sailor would say those things. And I kind of looked around, and these cute high school girls, 3 or 4 of them, talking this language that I was kind of floored. And I hear from our junior hires and our high school students what terrible language is bannered about, I guess, in our society, the society of at least our young people. And our actions are different than society's. Jesus talks about people persecuting you. Hurricane Sandy, it's interesting when a storm like that or some tragedy comes, for the first couple of days everybody is, really upset, and they're very empathetic or sympathetic for the victims, and, it's just an outpouring of love for these people who are struggling. But how quickly that changes as you see gas lines now, and you see people breaking into these gas lines or, breaking into line, and they've had to put policemen on every open gas station because of the fights that have broken out. How quickly society's actions become different than ours. I pray when people see you or people see me, that they see a difference. That they see that our beliefs are different. That they see that our words are different. That they see that our actions are different. But Jesus did not come to make life easy, but to help me and you find peace during our persecution. And that's exactly what he's saying as he's saying, blessed are you. Favored are you. Find peace in what you are doing. Persecution gives us some opportunities, brothers and sisters. First of all, it gives us the opportunity to show loyalty to Jesus. He says, whoever acknowledges me before men, I will acknowledge him before my Father in heaven. The first martyred Christian, Stephen, was simply a young man, a godly man who told the leaders, I guess in an unpolitical way, that you were the ones that crucified the Christ. And of course, they didn't like that. And they drug him out in the street, and they began to stone him. Can you imagine the pain that must have caused? I don't know if you remember, maybe as a young boy or girl, getting hit by a stone that someone had thrown and how painful that was. Can you imagine Stephen as those stones began to come? And the agony of it all, and the embarrassment even of it all, as people he knew stood around throwing stones at him. But yet, he asked God not to hold this against them. What loyalty he showed to Jesus Christ. Or persecution offers us an opportunity as we talk about the saints on this All Saints Sunday. An opportunity to walk with those saints. As Jesus says, in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You see, persecution just didn't start yesterday. It has come about throughout the last 2,000 years since the time of Jesus Christ. And it gives us an opportunity to walk with those saints. Can you imagine when our physical body gives out and we go to heaven to be with St. Peter, for instance, or St. Paul, or Stephen, for that matter, to be with the saints. Or persecution gives us a moment, a time and space. Jesus says, rejoice and be glad. Tradition has it that the early Christians in Rome, as they were being killed by the lions, as they were being killed by gladiators, as they were being set on fire for torches for the emperor's parties, would sing songs together. What a relationship they must have had with Jesus Christ and with one another. We see that a little bit in the story about the 3 young men who were taken captive in Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They would not bow to the statue of the king. And they were thrown into a fiery furnace. And this is what the king says. But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the middle of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the 4th has the appearance of a god. Indeed, it did, because it was Jesus Christ. Can you imagine the relationship that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had with Jesus in that fiery furnace? You see, Jesus did not come to make life easy, but he came to make you great. Whoever follows me will have the light of life. He came to make you great because you are a unique individual that God has created. He came to make you great because he wants you to do something this very day else in the world can do. He came to make you great because he loves you so much. And he gave his Son on the cross to make you great. And now you have that greatness, that light of life, that light and hope for your brothers and sisters right here at Trinity, that light and hope for those in our surrounding community. The peace of God that surpasses all human understanding, guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Amen. And we continue with our